Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan, and today I'm going to share every sci-fi series I read this year. And I'm going to put each of those series into one of 5 categories. And those are, number 1, completed. I read this series this year, I enjoyed it enough to finish it, and I'm going to share in this video just exactly how much I enjoyed it. Number 2, ongoing priority. I'm currently reading this series and I'm enjoying it, and I want to make it a priority to finish the series in 2024. Number 3, ongoing at leisure. So this is a series that I'm currently reading and somewhat enjoying, and I'm just going to pick up the next book in the series whenever I'm in the mood for it. I may or may not finish the series next year. Number 4, yeah, that's 4 fingers, soft DNF. So this is a series where I may have enjoyed aspects of it and I may give it another chance in the future, but I don't have any near future plans to finish the series. And number 5, set this series on fire and launch the ashes into the sun. Fortunately, I don't think any series fell into this category this year, but it's nice to have the rockets on hand just in case. So let's get into the series I read this year, starting with The Expanse by James S.A. Corey. So coming into the year, I had read 6 of the 9 main novels in the Expanse space opera series. And I did quite enjoy most of the books. I really liked the first one, but unfortunately the 6th book, Babylon's Ashes, was my least favorite, so I was a little bit nervous going into the final arc of the series, but fortunately it came through pretty strong. I did enjoy the final books, 3 books of the series, including Persepolis Rising, Tiamat's Wrath, which actually ended up being my overall favorite. I think it really just maximized everything that The Expanse does well in terms of the interplanetary politics, the characters, the action, the ideas. That was my favorite Expanse book, and I also thought it somewhat stuck the landing pretty well with Leviathan Falls in the end. So overall, I would describe this as a 4-star series for me. I think at its worst, it was still decent. At its best, it was borderline great, and for me, most of the books kind of varied from pretty good to very good. So I'd recommend this if you are looking for some space opera. I think it's fairly easy to get into, so if you're newer to sci-fi, maybe you're coming over from fantasy to try some science fiction, The Expanse, not a bad place to start. They're all relatively fast, fun, easy reads, but there is a little bit of depth there as well. So I'm glad I read The Expanse. Probably won't be reading any of the novellas, the other Expanse World books soon, but maybe sometime in the future I'll start to crave a little bit of The Expanse again. And just before we get to our next series, if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll be spinning the Quantum Wheel in order to find out what will be the patron pick for the month of December. Alright, for the second sci-fi series I read this year, we have The Dark Tower by Stephen King. So I know that The Dark Tower isn't purely sci-fi, there's definitely fantasy and horror elements in there as well, but it does feature things like time travel and robots, so I'd say there's enough sci-fi in there for it to count. So I started the series this year. I hadn't read any of The Dark Tower before, and this year I read The Gunslinger, the 2nd book, The Drawing of the Three, and the 3rd book, The Wastelands. So I quite liked The Gunslinger. It's pretty different from the other books that I've read, but towards the end it kind of hooked me in, pulled me in, made me want to read more of The Dark Tower, which is what most people recommend. They say the first book's a little bit polarizing, keep going to see whether you like The Dark Tower, and I would agree with that. And then books 2 and 3 I really enjoyed. I think Stephen King's character work, and I think I might be the first person to say this, Stephen King's character work is excellent. I really enjoyed the character voices, the dialogue. There's some really weird ideas that definitely captured my attention and made me want to read further into The Dark Tower. Now, we did hit a little bit of a stumbling block when I realized just how long the 4th book is, Wizard and Glass. It's a bit of a big one, and as I'll discuss later in the video, I did pick up a big book this year that I kind of struggled to get through, and that kind of put me off picking up any further big books for the rest of 2023. But I'm going to get back into it. I'm going to put on my big boy reading pants, my big book reading pants in 2024, and I'm going to continue The Dark Tower, because I'm pretty sure it's going to pay off. I'm pretty sure it's going to be worth it. We're going to get that Dark Tower momentum rolling again. So let me know if you've read The Dark Tower, which is your favorite in the series. I'm looking forward to finishing the series. I'm going to make it a priority. I'm going to do my best to finish The Dark Tower in 2024. And for our third sci-fi series of the year, we have Revelation Space by Alistair Reynolds. So going into the year, I had read some other books by Alastair Reynolds, including House of Suns, which is an all-time favorite, Aversion, which I really enjoyed as well, and I had sort of dipped my toe into the Revelation space universe by reading the prequel Chasm City. So I somewhat completed my goal for the year, as my goal for the year was to read the original Revelation Space trilogy, which starts with Revelation Space, which I liked, especially the back half of the book. And then the second book, Redemption Arc, which I absolutely loved. One of my all-time favorite space operas. I think if you're looking for something on the slightly harder end of sci-fi, but not too crazy, inside an epic world-building built world by Alastair Reynolds with really cool sci-fi concepts, great story, even pretty decent characters. There were some characters that I got connected to in this book as well. Then Redemption Arc just ticked all the boxes for me. And then we got to the third book, which Absolution Gap. That's right, I can remember the names of things. Absolution Gap, which I liked. I thought it had some good high points, but some things were a little bit anticlimactic. Some parts felt a little bit slow. Didn't quite reach the heights of Redemption Arc for me. So I will be continuing the Revelation Space series in terms of some of the prequels, some of the short stories, novellas, things like that, but it's not necessarily a priority. There are some other Alastair Reynolds works that I want to get to as well. For example, I own the standalone Pushing Ice, and I think Alastair Reynolds, I think he can write both series and standalones, but I have really enjoyed his standalones so far, including House of Suns and Aversion. So Pushing Ice might be the next one that I read next. So Revelation Space. I enjoyed the trilogy, and we'll keep going with the rest at some point. Alright, for our fourth sci-fi series, we have The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. So this series was high on my list of shame going into the year, and I finally got around to reading the classic, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You guys have been pushing me to read this for a while, and I loved the first book. I thought it had some really interesting ideas, funny characters, probably one of the funniest sci-fi books that I've read, alongside maybe Kurt Vonnegut and Andy Weir, which are very entertaining sci-fi writers as well, and I was really looking forward to diving further into the series. However, Book 2, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, I still liked it, but I found it to be significantly less funny and significantly more depressing, which is not necessarily a bad thing if you like that style, if you want to kind of dig into a sardonic sci-fi novel where everything is pointless and everything sucks. It might hit for you, but it had a very specific tone that I wasn't necessarily in the mood for at the time, and from what I've heard from other Hitchhiker's readers, that is the path it goes down as the series continues. For the most part, I feel like the first book is most people's favorite, so I do want to continue the series. After reading the first book, I was pretty sure I was going to finish the series this year, but I ran into a little bit of a stumbling block there. I will continue the series, but I think just based on the tone and the atmosphere of the books, I might have to pick and choose when exactly I'm in the mood to continue Hitchhikers. Alright, at number 5, we have Murderbot by Martha Wells. So unfortunately, we have our first soft DNF. I only read the first novella in the series, All Systems Red, and there were some things that I liked about it. I did enjoy being in the head of an artificially intelligent character. I liked sort of some of the questions, the quandaries that this character was experiencing, and I also thought for a novella, it did some interesting things with its world building as well. One of the aspects that I liked was that these future corporations were trying to run things at a profit, trying to reduce costs. So a lot of the technology was kind of cheap and didn't work very well. And I thought that was kind of an interesting twist on sci-fi, where usually we're looking forward into the future and we have this crazy high-powered technology that works really well, whereas some of the tech in this future was kind of crappy. So I found that sort of an interesting take, kind of amusing. However, for me, the problems were that I never really engaged in the story. I thought the story was rather simple, and I feel like the main selling point when getting pitched the series was how funny it is. And Murderbot's sort of the way they deal or discuss or think about certain social anxieties is a little quirky, it is a little different. Some people might find it relatable, but to me it didn't make me laugh, it just kind of made me sad. Like, Murderbot didn't have me chuckling. I kind of just wanted to give Murderbot a hug. Like, poor Murderbot? Like, are you okay? You know, everyone tells you to read Murderbot. Nobody ever tells you to check in on Murderbot, you know? So I can see why this series clicks with some people. I may give it another chance in the future just because they are novellas for the most part in the series. They're pretty short, but for me it wasn't something that super clicked, so probably not going to continue the series next year, but might check in a little bit down the road. And speaking of Robot, the 6th sci-fi series, that's too many S's, that I read this year was the Robot series by Isaac Asimov. So to be honest, I really only dipped my toe in the Robot series by reading I, Robot, which is kind of a prequel of sorts to the novels in the series. I, Robot is a series of short stories that are stitched together, so it feels somewhat like a book, although we do have these very divided chapters, and I enjoyed it. I liked this book. I thought there were some great sort of quintessential Asimov-type ideas, mixed in with a couple of emotional character moments. There were elements where I felt invested in what was going on, as opposed to just being stimulated sort of in an intellectual, academic, scientific type way, although I do of course think that is where Asimov shines. So I have heard quite a lot of good things about the Robot series, starting with Caves of Steel. That's quite a popular recommendation in the comments, so I think I probably will pick that book up next year. I don't know if I'll read all of the Robot books next year, depends on how much I'm enjoying them, but I think I'm going to give Caves of Steel a try. So let me know your thoughts on the Robot books and whether you think that I will like them. Moving on to our 7th sci-fi series I read this year, we have Terra Ignota by Ada Palmer. So this is our second soft DNF, and I was pretty conflicted on this one. So with Terra Ignota, we have a space opera of sorts that is written in a classic romantic style prose, and it's very elaborate. You can tell the amount of effort and time and love and care that has been put into the world building, but I'm not sure how much that actually added to the reading experience, how much I enjoyed it. It was something that I felt that was a little bit more impressive than it was actually enjoyable. So if you're someone that really likes the softer sciences in your science fiction books, you might like this, as it focuses on things to do with politics and religion and philosophy, and we also follow the story through the mind of a character which not a lot of people like. I think if this book was inspired by Gene Wolfe and The Shadow of the Torturer, so if you enjoyed following the character of Severian, you might enjoy following the character of Mycraft. There's some parallels there. For me, I found it a bit of a grind to get through the first book to Like the Lightning. However, there were elements that I found intriguing, and so when I got to the end of the book, I was rather conflicted because I thought, I do want to know the answers to this question, or these questions, multiple questions. So there were things that Ada Palmer did well in order to pique my interest, but every time I thought about picking up that second book, that little voice in the back of my head would say, yes, Jonathan, but remember how much of a grind this book was to get through for the most part? So I don't know. I think I will eventually cave and pick up book 2, but I don't think it's going to be a priority for me anytime soon. But I think this is a book that will land for some people. Let me know if you've tried Terra Ignota and what your thoughts are on it. And for our 8th sci-fi series that I read this year, we have Otherland by Tad Williams. So unfortunately, we have another soft DNF, and to be honest, that is not what I expected once reading the first couple of 100 pages of this book, because I was enjoying myself. So I started with book 1, The City of Golden Shadow, and I liked Tad Williams' writing style. I liked his prose, I liked his characters, I liked his dialogue, and I liked this sort of intriguing, somewhat near-future cyberpunk virtual reality world. I do like the genre, I do like that setting, and I thought he was doing some very interesting things. However, once I reached the halfway point of the book, I felt like I hadn't really learned all that much more about the world, and the plot had not really progressed all that much further either. By the end of the book, I felt the exact same way. To be honest, this didn't really feel like a complete book to me. It felt like Act 1 of a longer book, and that's okay, but if you read something that's around 750 pages long and you feel like it's just getting going, you really have to be enjoying the page-to-page experience, because at least for me, it started to test my patience. I really wanted to get some answers to some questions. I wanted the story to move along a little bit. I wanted to feel like there was a payoff for all of the time that I had put into the book, and I didn't feel like that had happened so far. I think the series might pay off in the long run, but I'm just not sure I have the time and patience to complete all 4 books in the series, at least anytime soon. My friend Jimmy from the Fantasy Network recently read book 2 in the series and said it was still just kind of trundling along. It was starting to test his patience, and I think Jimmy is a more patient reader than I am, so I don't think I'll be continuing the series anytime soon, but if you guys have, let me know your thoughts on the Otherland series. And for our second last sci-fi series in this video, we have the Jean Le Flambeur trilogy by Hannu Rajaniemi. Alright guys, we are back on track with a completed series. This was a hidden gem of the year for me. Not that many people have read the Jean Le Flambeur trilogy, but I'm gonna do my best to spread the good word of the Quantum Thief and my new best friend, Jean Le Flambeur. So, starting with book 1, we have a hard sci-fi, post-singularity, cyberpunk series that follows a heist story and a detective story. And this series gets super crazy with all the technology, all the science, all the terminology. It's hard to follow. I only understood about half of it, and I'm lying when I said I understood half of it. But at the heart of it, we have a heist story and we have a detective story. And it's just a really fun caper. I really liked getting immersed in this world, this story, these characters. And while the terminology was a bit overwhelming at the beginning, I found it really rewarding as I started to piece together what all of the different things meant and how that was relevant to the story. I think this is one of the most ambitious series that I've ever read. I didn't like the Fractal Prince and the Causal Angel quite as much as the Quantum Thief, but I still really liked them. The Quantum Thief set an incredibly high bar, one of my favorite new finds, so this isn't going to click with everybody. It's not necessarily an easy read, but if you like any of the elements I just mentioned, please give it a try, because I think it's absolutely awesome. And for the 10th and final sci-fi series that I tried this year, we have the Culture series by Ian M. Banks. So going into the year, I had read 2 Culture books, and they were The Player of Games, which is book 2, and I really enjoyed that one. Not quite an all-time favorite, but I thought it had some really interesting ideas, some memorable moments, a little bit of a hard and heavy read at times, but I was impressed with my first Culture book. And then I read Use of Weapons, which is also another very popular book amongst Culture fans. I was a bit more mixed on that one, because I appreciated how ambitious it was. We have 2 storylines that we follow that start here, and then the timelines, they both move this way. So I found that quite an interesting approach. I do like books that play with structure. However, for me, the problem was not so much the structure, but just each individual chapter was sort of failing to grab my attention. I was not quite able to get as emotionally invested in the story as I wanted to be. So going into the year, my opinion or experience with the Culture was a little bit mixed, and that kind of continued. I read 2 Culture books this year. I'm currently reading the second one. The first Culture book that I read this year was the first book, Consider Fleabas, and that was a nice surprise. This is not one of the most popular Culture books. It's the first book in the series, and a lot of people recommend you can skip it, as each book in the Culture is somewhat standalone, and a lot of people like The Player of Games, book number 2, more than Consider Fleabas, so they recommend you skip it. I'm not sure I'm in that camp. I sort of get the appeal, the desire to skip a book and start somewhere else, because you don't really often get the opportunity to do that. In most series, you have to start with book 1. So, you know, when your sci-fi parents come to you and say, you know what, tonight, young reader, you can start with dessert if you like. Who's going to turn that down? I understand the appeal of skipping Consider Fleabas, because it's out of the normal. It feels a little naughty, a little cheeky. But I would actually recommend starting with Consider Fleabas for 2 reasons. One, I think it's a good book. I think it is a fun adventure. It has a fairly simple traditional space opera structure, so perhaps it's less ambitious than some of the other Culture books, but I enjoyed it. We kind of hop around from place to place, we learn more about the world, we learn more about sort of the backstory of the Culture, which I think is helpful going into the rest of the Culture series. That was kind of my second point. I kind of combined points 1 and 2 while describing point 1. But anyway, it's a good book. I thought there was some good action, I thought there was some good ideas, I thought the plot moved fairly well. Some people describe it as slow. I didn't find it to be that slow. A couple of parts are a little overly descriptive. There's a bit of sort of info dumps here and there, but I didn't mind that. I actually thought they helped add to the experience, and a lot of people said they don't like the main character. I didn't have a problem with the main character. I wasn't necessarily loving them, I wasn't necessarily always rooting for them, but I thought they had a distinct perspective, and I liked sort of following this story through the eyes of a character with a unique perspective. So it's not quite my favorite culture book. I'd still put it slightly behind the Player of Games, but it was an enjoyable reading experience. I would recommend it. And if you want to start with if you want to go against the grain and start with Consider Fleabas, I say go for it. Here's where the mixed experience comes in. I'm currently reading Accession, and I'm having a really hard time getting into it. I'm about halfway through the book or so now, and there's some interesting ideas. I think it does things in a unique way in terms of some artificial intelligence, the approach to writing artificial intelligence, but it's pretty dry. I'm really not invested in the story. I'm really not invested in any characters. So we'll see. Maybe the second half will turn it around, but for me, I'm thinking that I will in the future just pick up a culture book when I'm in the mood for it, as opposed to making it a priority to finish in 2024. So let me know your thoughts on the culture. What are your favorites? Which I should pick up next? If I feel frisky and want to go out of order again, where should I go to with the culture? So there you go, guys. Those are the sci-fi series that I read this year. I'd say in terms of finding new all-time favorites, I probably had a little bit more success with standalones than series, but there were a couple of banger series in there as well. Let me know what you read this year and what was a hit for you, or maybe what was a little bit of a miss. And I'd just like to give a quick shout out to me for forgetting to intro the Quantum Wheel. Welcome to the Quantum Wheel, where all of the patron picks are both simultaneously picked and not picked until we observe a winner. Let's find out what will be the final patron pick of the year. The patron pick for the month of December. Lots of picks on the wheel this month. What's it going to land on? Maybe Contact. Will it tick over to Earth Abides? Contact! It held up. Awesome. I'm excited to read Contact. This has been on my TBR for a while, and Alex from Tall Guy Reads actually sent this to me as a gift, so that was very kind of him. I'm excited to finally be reading your gift, Alex. Let me know, guys, if you guys have read it. Do you like it? Are you going to read it? I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash or just gently click the subscribe button. And if you really enjoyed it, consider becoming a Patreon member, where you can become one of my robots, androids, or cyborgs like Nima in A New Eden, and you can find more sci-fi content over here.